is normally one says that it's a pleasure to speak to the River. Of course, I mean, there is no such thing as a pleasure in the days that we are confronted. So, yeah, you know, normally when I speak, I enter the discourse with an enormous amount of street credibility, or with confidence, given the history that that we come from in South Africa. And for a while now, I've no longer felt that confidence. On the contrary, I feel like a bit of a charlatan entering the discourse on Palestine. And it's actually embarrassing to be a South African and to have one's experience and one's living through one's survival, one's resistance against apartheid, for that to be a point of legitimation for the Palestinian struggle. You know, in the past, of course, we use the word apartheid. And in the past, you know, and this is why I say it's embarrassing, because the Palestinian struggle seems to derive its legitimacy by South Africans saying, yes, we know what you're experiencing. And at the same time, many South Africans who have been to Palestine, and if they have been engaged in the liberation struggle, they've always come back saying that what the Palestinians experience is many times worse than what South Africans have ever experienced during the darkest days of apartheid. And despite all of us saying this when we come back, the painful thing is that South Africa is still a reference point for Palestinians, despite the fact that their struggles, that their suffering, it's of course much worse than what we had experienced in South Africa. So it's kind of with a bit of embarrassment, you know, that I come to the seminar today. And yes, we know what apartheid is. We know what South African apartheid is. We know what it is to live and to battle and to just about survive in the shadow of white supremacy. And yes, the solidarity, the affinity that we immediately experience when we come to Palestine, that is there. And so, I mean, yeah, the context for this, of course, it is my South African context. It is my own participation in the liberation struggle that forms the context. And at the same time, a context for liberation theology, we are born in a particular context. And yet we are always called upon to transcend that context. And it is here where it is not just easy for us to recognize the Palestinian context, but also to go beyond our own parameters and what it meant in South Africa, and to connect with the larger solidarity movement, and in this case, Palestine solidarity as an extension of international solidarity. Not Palestinian solidarity on its own, because it is quite possible for people to be in solidarity with the Palestinians and at the same time harbor their own kind of racisms, or harbor their own kinds of phobias, or their own kinds of discrimination on the basis of caste or on the basis of sexuality. So it's not just a question of being in solidarity with the Palestinians. It is a question of being rooted in our context, always considering the extension of our context of being marginalized, and extending this to the Palestinian people. The second question that that was raised is, how do we use this experience or this context or our solidarity, how do we use it inside a larger context for community building? Now, look, the early liberation theologians in some ways had a more complex task. And their task often originated from actual base communities. So the starting point for liberation theology was indeed a community, a base community. And it was from that community wherein solidarity was built and solidarity was extended. And the difficult challenge that we have now is when we speak about community, community has become much more nebulous. So are you working in a particular community of, say, in the Indian and Pakistani context, of, say, the Christian or the Goan, the Punjabi sweeper or cleaner community? Are you working in that context? Are you working in a context of with other Black marginalized people who reflect on their own personal experiences and then transfer it? And so the question of community had become much more challenging for us, because many liberation theologians, and regrettably I include myself in them, we do have a context, and yet the context is painful. My context, for example, as a Muslim, is the Muslim community. In some ways, yes, it is the Muslim community, but it's also the context of where I find myself. I find myself in the academy, and in the academy, you have classes of people. You have cleaners, you have sweepers, you have security guards, in a world where the university seemingly consists of only professors, teaching staff, and students. So in that context, how do I build community? Of course, community also gets built around solidarity. And in our case, how do we build community in both in terms of our own experiences where we live, but also in relation to how do we build community with regards to Palestine solidarity? And so we are engaged in Palestine solidarity work and activity. And in doing so, do we do this in community with the Palestinians? And do we do this in community with each other as co-sojourners, co-travelers in the struggle, both for our own liberation and simultaneously for the Palestinian liberation? As for the third question, the question of what are the challenges or threats that face us in doing so? And again, I mean, I'm sorry to be starting off on the same note that to move on to the same note that it is some embarrassment that one speaks about challenges. Because really, and alhamdulillah, praise be to God, South Africa is a safe space for people to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people. We do not face any threats in South Africa whatsoever. Whatsoever, neither in public nor in private, not from the state, not from civil society. So it is a privileged situation in which to be speaking. The threats, of course, I mean, many other colleagues, I mean, people from Palestine, people who are international scholars, people who are still active in the academy and aren't that senior in the academy, there are certain threats that face them. It is jobs at stake. And of course, in response to all of that, we say, I mean, the challenge isn't whether you'll get a promotion or not. The challenge is, will you starve if you don't get a promotion? That is the question. And of course, the question of dangers and threats, I mean, for Palestinians, they know this narrative far more than anybody else. For us, I mean, who operate at an international level, it is in Germany, for example, I can't really speak in Germany anymore. I can't speak in France anymore. What's the big deal? What am I losing? Nothing really. And so I don't know, if I'm in any way qualified to speak about the question of dangers when one pursues the path of liberation theology. Where are we in relation to the Niemöllers, you know? Where are we in relation to Martin Buber? Where are we in relation to those serious theologians, you know, who put their lives on the line? One last thing that I want to say. You know, it's one of the things that we find quite curious from the South African side. In Palestine, for example, you do find a number of prominent Jewish names in solidarity with the Palestinian people, but none of them face any threats in the way in which many white people in South Africa face threats from the apartheid regime when they were in solidarity with Black people. And so this we find fascinating, you know, that I don't know, but there is a problem that that Jewish comrades who are in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, they somehow have never faced what the Palestinians are facing. In South Africa, we had people like Ronnie Kestrels, we had Joe Slovo, we had numerous white people who faced death, who were imprisoned for life. And so this kind of solidarity, you know, it's a challenging one, but we are desperate to see this from our Jewish comrades and our Jewish liberation theologians who are in solidarity with the Palestinian people. I realized that was a bit of a challenging things, but I had to throw it in. Thank you very much. Wa shukran.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It seems though Dr. Nancy is having some technical issues. So Dr. Arvind, maybe you could go next and we'll see if Dr. Nancy can join us.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So thank you, Samuel, once again for organizing this important webinar, and I'm happy to be part of it to show our solidarity. I would like to answer to the questions that you have raised. First one is the Yep. How does your context address solidarity with Palestine? If you take India, I think most of you are aware, the present religious and political context have some pertinent concerns that enable Indians, especially the secular-minded or open-minded Indians, to be in solidarity with Palestine. Some of the challenges that the Palestinians face are also common, maybe in a different form in India. Maybe I would like to highlight two things to say how we share or we are in solidarity with the suffering people in Palestine. One of the serious issues that is taking place in India is the way how the minorities are threatened in today's context. As you all know that India is a country with a diversity, diverse cultures, religions, languages, so on and so forth. There are more than 1.4 billion Indians population, in which 80% of the people, they follow Hinduism, 14 to 15% follow Islam, 2.3 or 2.2% people follow Christianity, and 1.7% people follow Sikhism. And also there are people who follow Jainism, Buddhism, and also there are people who don't believe in God, they don't accept any religion. So in a way, India is a secular country where freedom is given to profess, to practice our faith. But the present reality is that sometimes the fundamentalistic or the fanatic groups in the name of a majority religion are creating an ideology, trying to create one religion or one culture, one language. These sorts of things are taking place in India because these fanatic or fundamentalistic groups were directly or indirectly supported by the government machinery. So in a way, there is a narrative that has been that is being created by the majority people, so-called majority religion people. I will not say that all the people in the majority religion are for this, but then there is a narrative created to say that the minorities should be considered in future as second-class citizens and so on. So this is a big threat for the religious minorities in India. So in that way, I would say that even though we are citizens of this country, a new narrative is being created. How a new narrative is being created in Palestine or in Israel against the Palestinians and so on. So in that way, they are sidelined. The second main thing that relates India with the struggles of the Palestinians is the struggles of the Dalits in India. As you know that there are more than 200 million Dalits in India, 15 million Dalits are Christians. And this Dalit problem is, so to say, because of the social structure or social stratification, which we call it as caste system, which came to India before many thousands or many centuries, so to say, more than 2000 years ago, which outlines a particular group of people and says that you are untouchable, impure, and we are holy, and so on and so forth. And in the course of history, the religious texts were used in order to implement these statements of considering the people from the lower caste or people who don't come under the caste system as Dalits and untouchables and so on and so forth. So in a way, Dalits uh, face discrimination in all forms, all humiliations, and so they fight for their fundamental rights in the spheres of religion, culture, economy, politics, language, so on and so forth. So therefore, Dalits and their struggles for equality has challenged the dominating class. Okay, so in a way, the way how these struggles that the Dalits are facing cannot be equated maybe with any struggles of Palestinians. But then there is a space to identify with the people who are suffering there in terms of their struggles, which is an ongoing struggle. So in that way, I think there is a solidarity that can be created, which we already share with the suffering Palestinians. The second question is, how can liberation theology be a tool of community building among oppressed peoples, which translates a meaningful transnational resistance? Here I would like to state some of the important points of liberation theology, which we all are aware of, but it is time in order to revisit the purpose of liberation theology, which can be vibrant in today's context. So it is sort of applying religious faith by aiding poor and the oppressed through the involvement in political and civic affairs. And it stresses active participation in changing the unjust socio-economic structures. Not only that, in addition, Bible must be interpreted from the perspective of the oppressed and the poor in order to guard against the further injustices and to bring to light the suffering social victims. Thus here, Bible or the text of the Christians is used as a resource of liberation in order to bring liberation to the oppressed communities. So as an interpreter of the Bible, I also engage in reading the Bible from the Dalit perspective. We have Dalit liberative hermeneutics. So Bible can be interpreted, which has become a tool for the Dalits to be empowered and consider them as people of God, from no people to people of God, and who can live with dignity and so on and so forth. So for example, the Dalit liberative hermeneutics, which we use as a tool in reading the text, not only the scriptural text, not only the Bible, but also the stories of the Dalits, the unwritten stories, the songs, and so on and so forth. All these are resources which are read and reread in order to empower them and to make them to realize that we are also people and we have to stand for our identity against the hegemony and so on. So the interrelatedness of the biblical world and the struggles of the Dalits are seen here. And the God who liberated the people is also seen as the God who liberates the Dalits. And Jesus is also seen as a liberator. And sometimes we also interpret Jesus as the Dalit Jesus who sided himself with the oppressed community during his time. So thus a common platform is already there, in order to fight for the rights of the people. So what I would say here is that biblical texts and the experiences of the Dalit community is in fact a tool to create a meaningful transnational resistance, which I will be touching in the next question. So the struggles of the oppressed communities across the globe, and especially in the Palestinian context, who fight for the common cause of justice can be shared and supported from all quarters. That means support can be extended from all quarters. So there can be a common cause of liberation which can be initiated from any quarters of the world, wherever there is injustice and so on. And also the churches should also join to bring this liberation for the oppressed community. So there is a possibility of transnational resistance. And thirdly, what steps should liberation theologians take to form a more transnational solidarity? In spite of all the contextual theologies that exist across the globe, to my understanding, all these theologies and readings in the perspective of the marginalized people are often confined to a particular region. And that is the advantage and the disadvantage of the contextual theologies and different readings. Therefore, there is a need to translate these contextual theologies and the readings to the transnational level. The struggles and fight for freedom and equality, which are taking place in different corners of the world, should be exposed not only by the theologians of that particular context, but also from the other contexts. Moreover, a discourse between the contextual theologies and their readings should be initiated. The hermeneutical tool used by the interpreters from different contexts should be juxtaposed. Views should be exchanged, not only to understand the context of the other, but to stand in solidarity with my oppressed brothers and sisters. Doesn't matter to which context or continent or country they belong to. However, a transnational solidarity is a need of the hour, since things like transnational oppression is not just a problem between the global north and the southern countries, but a phenomenon happening among the countries with different hegemonic relationships throughout the world. Thus, I would like to conclude by saying the analogy of Apostle Paul, which is recorded in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, which says, when one part of the body suffers, all the parts suffer with it. When one part of the body suffers, all the other parts suffer with it. Hence, there is a need of transnational liberation theologies, which will certainly lead to transnational resistance against any form of oppression. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much for that. I don't know if Dr. Nancy, her Wi-Fi is strong enough. I keep on seeing it getting cut off as she's in Angola. Dr. Nancy, are you with us? It doesn't seem so. Yeah. So, Assis Naim, perhaps you can go now, as we still, as Dr. Nancy seems to have technical difficulties. Maybe you can share your presentation now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
And I'm not sure whether people can see me because I cannot see myself on the screen. But I want to begin by just saying thank you to my friends who have come to us or are with us. My friend Farid, Nancy, I hope she will be able to join us. And I have not had the privilege of meeting Aravind, but I hope someday we will be able to meet. But I have always appreciated your friendships and your solidarity with us, especially during this time in which we have been going through some dark days, feeling with our people who have been victimized, have been under fire, the thousands that have been killed, the thousands that have been wounded, the women, the children, the people in Gaza, and also on the West Bank. One of the things that I really wanted to share with our theologians who are with us, and also other pastors and clergy and people, is to reflect on the whole question of the silence of God. When crisis happens and people are looking for, or their faith is being challenged, how do we, as theologians, as people of faith, how do we meet such a challenge? How can we help people understand and explain when people are crying for God, and it seems for many of them, where is God? In the scriptures, people ask many times, my God, why have you forsaken me? They feel abandoned. They feel they are in great trouble. Their faith has been shaken, and they are questioning many things, what humans are doing. All these make it very important for us to wrestle with these questions. Another thing which I think my friend Averend have mentioned, the question of the Bible, still, because Netanyahu has been quoting the Bible. So there are many texts in the Bible that need to be addressed nowadays. How do you use some of these Old Testament texts that reflect racism, that reflect apartheid, that reflect many problems that we are facing today? So still before us, the biblical text needs to be addressed very well. And, maybe we should have waited longer to have this webinar, but because maybe we are all anxious about what's happening, especially in Gaza, although there are many problems on the West Bank, but at least for our brothers and sisters in Gaza, I have been focusing so much on that. And for the last just few minutes that I have, I just want to say, give a dream of what I think about what needs to happen after the end of this, or the silencing of the war, or what we are now trying to see, the ceasefire, and bringing the food, the water, bringing the medications to Gaza, helping the people who have been so much shattered and devastated by that tragedy. But I'd like to say that when I look back at the history of the conflict, I feel that there are three countries that have given us so much pain and so much agony over the years, from the beginning of the conflict. And here I'm specifically mentioning about Britain, the British Empire, and the United States, and the Zionists. Those three entities, three countries, three states, have given the Palestinians so much pain and so much sorrow and so much suffering. And I really feel that maybe we need to work to think how we can turn or challenge these people. Many of the people of those countries are friends, are wonderful people, but at the same time, the governments have acted so much against us. So how can we turn them into becoming people who are concerned about changing the situation? So instead of being people who are against us and against the Palestinians, maybe they can play an active role in the rebuilding of the Palestinian state and Palestinian country. So after the ceasefire, I'm thinking about a dream. Maybe it's not realistic for people of power, but it makes sense to me, and I want to share just few ideas here, largely on the question of Gaza, without going much on the West Bank and the general problem. But I would say that as soon as the ceasefire takes place, and as soon as the war ends, I think the United Nations, through its General Assembly, must declare that the occupation of Palestine is over. We need to push as much as we can to make it clear we cannot live anymore under Israeli rule. The Palestinians, the occupation of Palestine, which is illegal, what Israel has done over the last 50 years or more, that needs to end. Our people needs to breathe the air of freedom, of liberty. This is what I think needs to happen. And I believe that the United Nations need to take over for a period of time, and maybe in this dream, I dream about maybe a short, relatively short period in which the United Nations might invite the people and governments of South Africa and Ireland to help us to come for a short period of time as peacekeeping uh, and peacemaking forces that oversee and manage and coordinate the United Nations and the Palestinians with the United Nations and with the Palestinians to rebuild the Gaza Strip, and to build Gaza as a free city with a free seaport open to the world. This is a dream that I have. Yeah. And I believe also in this dream that I have is that immediately with the help of these friends, because I believe South Africa has always helped us and has always looked favorably on us and has seen that the occupation needs to end, and Ireland is the same way. I believe that they can help us with the United Nations and with the world to build an elevated freeway that would link the Gaza Strip with the West Bank, an elevated freeway where Palestinians can go back and forth between Gaza and it's doable. I believe it's doable, and I'm not an engineer. I'm not the right person to determine such things, but the idea, the dream, the vision is there. That immediately we construct this freeway that will make it easy for the Palestinians of the West Bank and the Palestinians in Gaza have free access to each other, and they can go directly. They shouldn't even stop in Israeli areas. They can just go on this freeway there, and then try to rebuild Gaza as a place open to the world. You know, it can be such a beautiful place, such a beautiful city, and we pray for healing of our people. These are some of the ideas that I have. I have a long list of the dream that I've been thinking about, but I just wanted to at least raise these issues, and I believe that it is doable and give a new life to the Palestinian people, and with the help of God and the support of the international and the global family, maybe we are able to really see a new phase, a new day coming to our people in Gaza, and later on other ideas that I have for the West Bank and for East Jerusalem, a complete vision, dream of peace. And I still remember what our late friend Desmond Tutu, who was always talking about God's dream for the world, God's dream. And this is the dream that I like to share with you. Thank you, dear friends, for joining us in Zoom. I'm sorry for maybe the short notice, but we hope to see you again. Continue to pray for us and support us in the work of justice and peace. Thank you.
Assis, thank you very much. I would now recommend, if any of you have any questions, to post them in the chat, and I will try and ask them as best as I can to our speakers. And also, unfortunately, Nancy, Dr. Nancy won't be able to be joining us. Maybe now she's joining, but the Wi-Fi just keeps on getting cut off. So perhaps as a moderator, I'll take my privilege to ask the first question to our presentees. The issue, what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank and in Palestine in general is obviously not out of a vacuum. It is in a context of settler colonialism, 75 years of it. And during the 70s and even earlier, there's been movements that were against Zionism from African voices and other Middle Eastern voices and global South voices in general, because they recognize Zionism as a colonial movement. Having said that, the product of what we're seeing today, what we are witnessing today, is colonial violence, and something that the global South does recognize and have recognized as a colonial enterprise that is happening in Palestine, a settler colonial enterprise. What is the vision of liberation beyond the borders of Palestine? But what are the vision of liberation on a transnational level, where it is a liberation for people who are oppressed from coloniality in general? That is my question to my presentees. Feel free to any of you to answer them in order.
Samuel, if I may have a quick go at it. The one is the question of vision. And from a South African context, for example, we, during the years of the liberation struggle, especially in the last 10, 20 years of it, we could speak about a non-racial, an undivided, and a non-sexist South Africa. So these were the three major elements that we put in place for our vision. And the non-racial, that's easy to understand. The non-sexist is also easy to understand. But the undivided part came from the contrast with the divisive nature of apartheid. That apartheid sought to divide people on the basis of ethnicity. And in contrast to that, we want to form a non-racial society. So there was this vision. The one challenge that we have, and it's a permanent challenge for all progressive thinkers, for all liberation theologians, is to how do we continuously shift our vision in terms of our permanent rethinking of what the margins are. And this is in the nature of liberation theology. We have to reflect all the time on our praxis, and our praxis must lead us to new insights. And new insights will also determine what the nature of our vision is. I don't want to move from what we're talking about, but for example, we're increasingly becoming aware of the life of sentient beings. We're increasingly becoming aware of how our existence on the earth is tied up with the existence of other beings that inhabit the earth. We're beginning to understand how colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism is connected to viewing the earth as, as territory to be exploited, territory to be invaded, territory to be captured. And so those are new understandings. And in terms of those new understandings, our vision thus has to change. And so the urgency, of course, for Palestinians is liberation from settler colonialism, connected to what we're increasingly seeing is white privilege and international capital. It's not just the occupation that they're facing inside Palestine, but it is the convergence of power from the global north to capital, to capitalism. You even see how this is manifesting itself inside quote unquote Israel. Okay, so I am saying that on the one hand there is a need for us, for Palestinians, to have a vision of what a post-Zionist society may look like, and at the same time, as liberation theologians, we are cognizant of the fact that we need to expand that vision all the time in terms of where our praxis guides us.
Would anybody else from the presentees would like to answer that question? Okay, there's a few more questions, and this could be, this is for both, for all of the presentees, if you're still with us. I would like to know from the speakers, one, can religious leaders play a role in addressing the issue of ethnic cleansing? Two, could interreligious dialogue help bringing peaceful coexistence? Perhaps Dr. Arvind, would you go first?
Yes. Thank you for the questions. Maybe I would like to start with the second one. Yeah, could interreligious dialogue help bringing peaceful coexistence? I think definitely this will help in bringing peaceful coexistence. But the point today, what is happening is how, as Christians, we are understanding the conflict that is taking place in Israel and Palestine. For example, if I see from my perspective, from my context, there are Christians who will support, who will directly or indirectly say that, okay, everything is happening according to the prophecies in the Bible. So, in a way, they are directly or indirectly supporting Zionism. And on the other hand, there are also people who criticize the way how the innocent Palestinians, especially women, children, and innocent people are killed day by day. So I think a clear-cut understanding from the Christian perspective is also important. For example, I have a yardstick. I look God as a God of justice. A God of justice, whom I see in the Old Testament or whom I see in the Bible, will not accept any sort of injustice taking place in the name of God, in the name of killing a group of people and occupying and so on and so forth. So, in terms of, I think, interreligious dialogue, these, perspectives should also be taken into consideration. So I think there is possibilities are there, but these are some of the challenges that we have when we look at the issue. Because Christians say that this is the promised land of the people of Israel, so they have every right to occupy and so on and so forth. So how to tackle this issue? That is the greatest challenge, and that's what Dr. Atik also raised. How to see God in this context? How do we see God in this context? So, how can we understand God from the Old Testament? The passages from the Bible are used in order to justify violence. So, how can we interpret and reinterpret? So, I think that justice point of view should be there from all the religions' perspective. In that case, I think there is an interreligious dialogue possible to initiate, I think, coexistence. I remember during my visit to Israel, Palestine, the year 2022, had the opportunity to listen to the teachings of the different religious leaders in Israel. They were for peaceful coexistence. But sometimes the peaceful coexistence which are initiated by the religious leaders are also politicized. And I think religious leaders should question the ethnic cleansing. Not only religious leaders there in Palestine or Israel, the religious leaders across the globe should condemn, should raise their voice. So I think in this issue, even among the Christians and the religious leaders, there are double standards which should not be there, because we have to see this from the point of view of God who would like to establish justice for all, not only for a selected people. So any violence in the name of religion cannot be accepted.
Look, Dr. Jayakumar, I'm sorry to come in now. I mean, I don't know if I hope you actually finish with your comments. But I don't know, man. I really come from a completely different position on the question of inter-religious dialogue as a response to the question of occupation and oppression. My position is that interreligious dialogue is inevitably used as what I call a butterfly dance of escapism and digression. The truth is that the oppression of the Palestinian people is not a result of Muslims not understanding Jews or Jews not understanding Christians. It's not a question of people not understanding each other at all. And the question of interreligious understanding, that's not, I think that rather than the question of dialogue, which often takes the forms of fora and so on, and kind of pious platitudes, everybody just, you know, my religion says, oh, you know, Islam is peace, and what is a prerequisite, certainly in liberation theology, it is interreligious solidarity against Pharaoh, against the occupation, or against the armament industries or armament military officers or whatever, you know, where they may be. And it is in our work of solidarity that we find each other, as Muslims, as Jews, as Hindus, as Christians, or people of no or any faith, but only in that struggle. Any kind of interreligious dialogue that is aimed just at conversation, that is escapism, that is digression. You want to remove my attention from the primary entity responsible for my oppression and occupation. And so this interfaith thing, and I say this with all respect to many of the participants that are present here, the interfaith project is a project that is co-opted by the powerful, funded by the powerful, co-opting the best amongst us to remove our attention from the primary challenge. However, the point that you're making about challenging fundamentalist theology, that is important for all of us as theologians in our own traditions. Each of us must be able to critique what is there in our own texts that lend itself to hegemonic projects. I, as a Muslim, I need to think about this. I need to work through it. And at the same time, once I have indicated substantial interest or ability to critique my own, I don't have to stop with just my own. I feel entitled to criticize and to deal with right-wing Christian fundamentalism. I feel perfectly comfortable critiquing the Jewish appropriation or the territorialization of God, as if God is a little mascot for the Jewish people. This, in Islamic terms, is shirk. It is associationism with God. So yes, there is space for serious interreligious theological reflections and so on, but this is a very, very different ball game than the one that I've been a part for many decades and have abandoned. I've turned my back on it. This game of interfaith dialogue, which is simply, you know, let's have a cup of tea, you know, and ignore the huge issues of systemic injustices. I'm sorry, my apologies for rambling for so long, but yeah, I really got worked up with that one.
No, thank you for that. It was very, very helpful. Assis Naim?
You know, when it comes to interreligious or interfaith relations, I believe there are three important elements that are the base, should be the basis. That the first one, I think the importance of understanding the other. Understanding. This is very important. The second is respect of the other. And the third one is acceptance of the other. These three important conditions can, without them, I don't think there is a healthy or productive interchange. Or I think to understand the other person is very important. I need to be open to understand, and I need to for them to give them space to help me understand. This is very important. And then I need to respect. I'm not trying to convert them. I'm trying to I want to respect them, respect what they believe, respect their relationship with God in the way they understand it, not in my way of understanding, and then finally accept them as they are. I think these three conditions are very, very important whenever we think about interfaith or interreligious relationships.
Thank you, Assis. This is a question to all of the panelists. What strategies can a transnational global South liberationist movement can take in confronting Western Christian/Zionist support for Israel? Perhaps Professor Farid, would you like to go first?
Professor Farid has spoken far too much. Thanks, Samuel. I mean, look, religious communities, and to that extent, the larger interreligious liberation theology entities or pockets of the world wherein we may exist, or pockets inside our religious community. There is conversation. There is not nearly sufficient conversation. That's the one thing. The second thing, there is not nearly sufficient permeating of this conversation to younger people. And so how do we get to speak in the same way that we had faced the challenge earlier on about community building? How do we draw more and more people into our ranks? Now, one of the advantages in some ways that we have with the expansion of social media is the fact that networks can be built. Networks can be built across borders, and a good number of those networks do exist. There isn't nearly sufficient conversation across religious boundaries, not nearly enough. There is still the problem, and I don't have any serious issues with it, although it is a bit of a niggling thing, that, that theology is still seen as Christian theology. Liberation theology is still seen as Christian liberation theology. I'm just saying it's a niggling thing. It's not a big thing, because the truth is that, that certainly as far as liberation theology is concerned, the work that there has been from Jewish quarters or from Islamic quarters has been quite insignificant. So incidentally, when people say, Farid Essek is one of the big, liberation theologians in Islam, nothing to write home about. There aren't that many of them in any case. And so, yes, there is. I mean, we have a number of people who are speaking prophetically in the world today. More needs to be done to foreground their voices. And at the same time, Samuel and others, we need to be careful about that we don't arrogate to ourselves a privileged position over other social and political movements. In South Africa, for example, There was a time when just about all our civil society formations were either in prison or on the run. And the only people that were still able to speak were religious leaders and the church. Fine, we understand that. But this doesn't mean that the church must then arrogate to itself, a position of emerging as the spokesperson of people. We are the voice of the voiceless, yes, but continuously we have to always find out ways of disempowering ourselves so that the voiceless can acquire more agency. So there is a need, I think, and one needs to think, and it's difficult to think now in the middle of a war, but post-war, as Ustad Naeem Atiq said, post-war, what is post-war? I'm sorry, my apologies for even using the term post-war. There is a need for us to think more strategically, and this is the question that, alas, we're not in a position to answer now because we don't know what will be the new dynamics that face us when the current round of I don't know, for want of a better word, the current Nakba, the current decimation of our people, when that round for now comes to an end. But there is a need for people to think strategically beyond the visionary parts, beyond the anger and the things that we're entitled to express. Shukran.
Yeah, I agree totally with Dr. Farid. I think exchange of theologies, as I mentioned also in my third, answering to the third question, that sometimes the contextual theologies were confined to a particular context, where there is no room to know about the struggles or the theologies of the other contexts. So there can be exchange, and also there can be a discourse between the contextual theologies. Especially they can be juxtaposed. Okay, I think in that way we can go for a transnational liberation theologies, or in other words, transnationalizing liberation theologies. Unless and until we don't, take it beyond the borders, then I think it will remain confined to one particular context. For example, my visit to Israel Palestine enabled me to understand more about the Palestinian liberation theology. So the Palestinian liberation theology is also now into the process of decolonizing the Palestinian liberation theology. So this also gave me interest to keep side by side the Palestinian liberative hermeneutics and also the Dalit liberative hermeneutics, in order to see how the biblical texts, or stories from the different contexts can be brought together, placed side by side, and then which can enrich and it can be shared. So I think because of the technological development in today's context, the social networking have paved the way to exchange the theological concerns. I think that can be used as a platform in which I think the transnational resistance can also be created. So it is not only the voice of the people who are suffering or voice from the context, but also the voice from another context. For example, I can raise my voice for the people who are struggling there. In a way, it is a sort of transnationalizing the liberation theology. Yes.
Athis?
After the war, I hope when there is time for us to meet to discuss what needs to happen, I think we need to be meeting and reflecting and speaking and wrestling with whatever we are going to be doing, having in mind our thoughts and remembrances of the crushed children of Gaza. Anything else that doesn't make sense with the memory of the children of Gaza is futile, doesn't mean anything. We cannot go on towards the future if anything we say or decide does not take into consideration and is not in light of the children of Gaza. Maybe I'm not saying it in the right form or the right way, but I believe it is absolutely crucial that when we think about rebuilding relationships, not only people's homes and people's life, but relationships, solidarity for the future of all the people of Gaza, regardless of their backgrounds, and also inside Israel, unless we have in mind the tragedy, the suffering of the children. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. I think this is the starting point for us when we think about the future and the future of our people and all the peoples of this land.
Thank you. Here's a question I think will be relevant for us now trying to be active and advocating and trying to create change and help what's going on in Gaza is how does BDS fit into the creation of this transnational vision proposed by the theologians? Where does BDS fit into our vision of a transnational liberation end? Sis, maybe do you want to go first?
I think it's very important to think about BDS. But, at least in this dream that I have, we can move right into, we don't need BDS in that sense, because the occupation would end. There is no, Israel would be a partner with us in peacemaking, but so long as the occupation continues, so long as the Palestinians are being disregarded, negated, and their rights are negated, then it's important to boycott. It's important to divest, and it's important to sanction the Israeli government and the Israeli whatever, sanctions that need to take place. So it's all dependent on the ending of the occupation and the new page, new history, new era for all the people of this land, of our land, that is created and is built for the future generations of all of our people here.
Would any other presentee would like to answer that question?
Well, I think that the BDS movement, it's a very important anchor in our work. Often, you know, with theology, our work is confined to either the academy or to seminaries or different theological forums and so on. So, I mean, the one anchor, of course, that there is always for liberation theologians, it is our own religious and community contexts. So that's the one anchor. You know, during the liberation struggle days in South Africa, I headed a significant Muslim formation in the liberation struggle called the Call of Islam. And the Call of Islam, in fact, they were the leading progenitors or advocates or practitioners of liberation theology inside South Africa. But all of the people identifying with the Call of Islam, they had two formation obligations. They had an obligation to be engaged in the Call of Islam's understanding of liberative praxis and Islamic, Quranic reflections on that liberative praxis on the one hand. But every single member of the Call of Islam was also under obligation to belong to one of the secular, for one, we don't use that word in South Africa, but non-religious political formations in the country, whether it was the trade unions or women's organizations or student organizations. We didn't want our people to be informed entirely, solely by their own religious texts, religious backgrounds and traditions. And so we compelled every person engaged in the Call of Islam to have another home entity. And that home entity was either the United Democratic Front, the internal things of the African National Congress, or as I said, trade unions or women's organizations or whatever. And so in our own work as liberation theologians concerned about Palestine, we also have another anchor other than our own theological traditions. And that anchor is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. This is not a movement that belongs to just a particular entity, the Boycott National Committee in Ramallah. It's this thing that all of us belong to. And so in our different kinds of, in addition to whatever theological work we may be engaged in, this is the primary area of our own praxis. And it is in this that we begin to reflect what, where does Christ stand in relation to this work of ours? Where does the church stand? I mean, today, you know, in the mosque, in the middle of kind of much sympathy and prayers and so on for the Palestinians and the people of Gaza, I remain troubled by how the imams synonymized Jews with the evil. And so this is the mosque. I need to challenge anti-Semitism in my own mosque. It's not on. It's not on even in a time of war. It is never on. I'm not going to fall for the white privilege thing where I privilege anti-Semitism above other forms of racism. I'm not going to do that and make that the barometer of, no. So what I am saying is that the BDS movement is an anchor for all of us, an anchor through which we can engage theologically and examine our own texts and religious traditions. And that accompanies our own more seriously, quote unquote, theological work. Washukran.
Thank you very much. We're soon getting out of time. We have just a couple of minutes left for this webinar. Perhaps in a very brief sentence, I will allow the presentees just to give one last remark that you would like to give all the attendants here. I'll begin with Dr. Arvand, and then Professor Farid, and Assis Naim, you'll be the last person to conclude this meeting.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you for the opportunity to share our views from the point of view of our Indian perspective, especially from the theologian's point of view. I think it is a struggle. It is a struggle how to encounter this situation, how to address this situation, because of the way how innocent people are treated, how children, women, who have nothing to do with the power politics and the power dynamics. I think that is the greatest challenge that we face to address this issue when we look at the things that are going on. But as a theologian, as a teacher of the Old Testament, and also as a reader of the Bible from the liberation perspective, the God whom we see as a liberator is not an oppressor. And the text is abused and used, has been used and abused over centuries, and the same thing is happening today. So it is a need of the hour to raise our prophetic voice against the way how the scriptural passages are used in order to bring domination and violence and occupation. So that is how I feel that there needs to be a rereading of the text which brings violence. And also, as the title of the seminar says, that there needs to be a transnational, relationship. The liberation theologies should go beyond the boundaries and create a relationship so that we can collectively address the ongoing slaughter and the injustice which is taking place, especially at this time in Palestine and Israel, or in any corners of the world. Thank you.
I just want to quickly respond to a question, and now that will be my last comment, that I think Catherine asked. I don't know if Catherine is still with us. Catherine asked, what is the meaning of talbir? Of course, I think she meant, what is the meaning of takbir? And takbir, I mean, you may hear this in demonstrations, particularly by Muslims, It's a kind of a response call thing where the speaker shouts takbir and the crowd, especially if a good point was made, and then the crowd responds and they shout Allahu Akbar. Now, the truth is, I mean, that the slogan Allahu Akbar, it has been used and also abused in much of Muslim discourse, and also in Muslim fundamentalist religious discourse. But very briefly, this takbir, Allahu Akbar, it means God is greater than. And theologically, and in the context of Zionism, God is greater than your own reduction of God to a realtor or to a real estate agent. God is greater than our own religions trying to capture God and give God a Christian label or a Muslim label or a Jewish label. So in some ways, this expression, Allahu Akbar, it is pregnant with very liberatory meanings. But like the God that fundamentalist seeks to capture and put into a box, Muslims are perfectly capable of taking this Allahu Akbar and put this expression also in a little box for their own fundamentalist or their own hegemonic pretensions, even if they, I'm talking about hegemonic pretensions also that many Muslims and Muslim religious formations, they do have. And of course, it is a challenge for us who are engaged in liberation theology. But let me stop there. I've spoken enough. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to say at the end that we are very thankful for your presence, my friend Farid, and my new friend Aravind.
Very much, Naeem, very, very much.
I'm sorry for the short notice, but you generously have responded, and you've been with us. So we thank you. We thank all the people that have been present. I'm sorry that that Nancy was not able to continue with us, but I understand. We're also dealing with technology. Some of us are not very great in using. I'm speaking about myself before others. And I want to just say that please stay in solidarity with us. We don't want you to be pro-Palestinian. We want you to be pro-justice, pro-peace, pro-understanding, pro-liberation, pro-reconciliation. This is what we are. We need to be committed to the justice in accordance with international law. And so with that, I say thank you again. May God bless us all as we continue to strive for a just peace for all the people of our land. And I want to also thank Samuel for his leadership, and Omar Harami, who is our director of Sabil now in Jerusalem. And so thank you again, and please pray for us and work with us for the achievement of a just peace for all of the people of our land. Thank you.
This, and thank you everyone. May our meetings and connections and relationships be rooted in praxis, in good works for liberation for all those who are oppressed around the world. Thank you again for the attendees and the presentees. It was a pleasure to moderate this webinar, and hopefully we can do something to change and to put pressure and to work for those suffering around the world, but especially in Gaza and in Palestine right now. So in solidarity, I would like to say goodbye to everyone and have a continued blessing day, and may God protect all of us and protect all those who are doing good work. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.